watching this on rebroadcast of not watching this live. And so just want to introduce you to our Student Success Series with the Mentor Waco Coalition. Our presentation today is going to be our second week on cultural humility, and it's being led by Jocelyn Williams. I am excited to introduce her to do the second week of this specific series. Jocelyn has been a resident of Waco since 2017 after marrying Morris Williams, a Waco native. She's a native of Jessup, Maryland, which is a small town in between DC and Baltimore. She holds a bachelor's degree in music performance from the University of Richmond and a master's degree in music performance from Catholic University. Although music and teaching are her first love, Jocelyn has always had a passion for community outreach and development. She watched her mother go before the local county council in her hometown and advocate for neighborhood improvements such as sidewalks, streetlights, and neighborhood park and programs for seniors. So joining the grassroots community development is just like walking her mother's footsteps. She's the newest member to Grassroots beginning in December 2019, and Jocelyn primarily works in East Waco. She's been doing this sort of work for quite some time. I'll let her kind of briefly go over that. One other thing I just want to quickly reference is that, the series is designed for rebroadcast, but at the end, we'll have a time where Jocelyn can give her email or other contact info. If you want to ask questions, months down the road from watching this, that, will be an option. And I'm Travis Cheatham. I'm the current chair of the Mentor Waco Coalition. So thank you, Jocelyn, for leading the session.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Travis, for that great introduction, and good morning to everyone. Again, my name is Jocelyn Williams, community organizer from Grassroots Community Development. I am happy to be working with you today around the subject of cultural humility. And so even though this is a training for our mentors and our educators, I consider it to be more of a conversation because it's something that we all have experiences with in different ways. We can learn from each other. We can learn and grow together. So it's more of a way of being culturally aware also. Learning how that works for you through your life experiences, through what you do as a mentor here in Waco and beyond. So I am going to first share my screen. Before I do that, I just want to thank Josh Caballero and Elise Jones, who are other community organizers at Grassroots, for supporting me through this and participating in the conversation and even in our planning, because we have done some other cultural humility awareness training in Waco recently. So this is another way for us to grow and expand. Let me share my screen so we can get started. Let's see, make sure that's the one. Okay, so can you all see this? Can I get a thumbs up for those of you who are joining us? I'm gonna move it over here, I think. Okay. So this is, I chose the title I See You because of the fact that, it's kind of a buzzword term for some of our young people, like saying I see you, but what does that really mean? What does it mean when they talk about I see you? And what does it mean when we say it even as a mentor, or thinking about that term as a mentor or an educator, about us seeing the families, the children that we interact with, that we're mentoring? So that's kind of why I kind of picked that. It's important for us to have a wide lens perspective instead of a narrow lens perspective. Let's first do a few little housekeeping guidelines. I call these conversation guidelines or house rules, just so that when we're having these conversations, or even later, if you email me or we talk, this is a way that we can have these conversations respectfully. So first, respecting confidentiality, speak from your own experience using I terms, share the airspace, which means don't dominate the time that we have together. Listen for understanding and not judgment. So again, we're all learning from each other. So listening to understand more, to get a different perspective. Be fully present in the discussion as appropriate. Right now, people may be on their cell phones or have to use them or whatever, but just try to be present as much as possible. Lean into being challenged or in discomfort. Sometimes we're challenged or intrigued by what we hear and see. And that's okay, because it means, again, that we're learning, that we're opening our minds and our hearts to new things, or to learn about ourselves and others. Be open to silence and reflection. And of course, since this is around lunchtime that we're doing this, you are welcome to eat and or drink during the session. Just please don't do it while we're talking to each other. Then here's some ways to communicate. We're going to keep, for those of you who are joining us live, we're going to keep our videos on mute until our conversation or questions are started in this discussion. And so we'll have a bunch of back and forth today. So just be mindful of that. Please share your screen as appropriate. Some of you are working from home or working in your office, or have people coming in and out. So I can understand if you're not able to share your screen, but as appropriately do so. And then you can also share comments and or questions in the chat. And that's why I'm going to ask like Travis or Josh or even Elise to kind of monitor that if needed, if I miss something. So just to recap of last time we met, we talked about cultural humility, and here is the definition that we have kind of been using at Grassroots as we talk about cultural humility. Main thing that it is about learning in a humble and respectful way about other cultures, and it challenges your own cultural biases, but it also allows you to approach learning about other cultures as a lifelong goal and or process. And then from that, I also shared this overview of cultural humility. And I like the two little bullet points at the bottom that talks about is shift your focus of trying to understand other people to a focus of your own self-awareness. And you also get a chance to acknowledge one's own perspective may be full of assumptions and prejudices. So we talked about, with that, we looked at social identifiers, or how we see ourselves. And so with that, we kind of did an identity wheel activity and talked about the different parts of our identity that we picked from it. So you had a list of options that you could pick that you thought represented you today and how that was. So what I'm going to do is actually share this one, which is our social or cultural identifiers. Kind of the same thing. It just looks a little different. It's in list form, where we had done a circle, but this is actually a list that was created or that was started through the National Association of Independent Schools in Washington, D.C., as a way, especially to get children or students to kind of start seeing themselves. And they talked about this as the big social cultural identifiers. So that's why I'm listing those there. But then as time went on, they felt like that this kind of pigeonholed them a little bit because it was kind of constructed. So they did a more expanded list. Not only did they have this, but even to just help you see even more about your multifaceted self, they had this expanded list that included body image, educational background, your academic and social achievements, family of origin or your family makeup, geographic background, your language, learning styles, beliefs, whether they're religious, social or political, and globalism or internationalism. So it kind of hit all the ranges of socially or culturally identifying yourself. So we talked about that, and then we talked about culture, about the culture of mentors, the culture that we live in, and we looked at a video called The Danger of a Single Story, and it really talked about a person's view of their own life experiences and how that played into, or the things they thought they knew about people or didn't know about other people that they were interacting with, and it played into their assumptions. And so we talked about the danger of that, to be just more engaging, more learning about or expanding your mind and just not going with what you see on TV or through literature. So today, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take you through a whole bunch of different definitions, and we're gonna kind of talk about them a little bit. And so, and there's some videos that I'm gonna share, and I'm gonna get your reactions to them. I tried to put them in the voices as much as possible of youth or young adults, so that you could have really an eye view that is not just me talking to you, but you kind of hear it firsthand from others that as they are experiencing that and what it actually means. So the first one that we're going to do is, or it gets us through the whole session, is isms, ists, iases, and ions, ishons. What's it all about? And so look at this right here. I broke it up. I broke this first one up into race, racism, and racist. These are some terms that are used constantly right now. And as we're working with youth, whether it's virtual or whether it's pen pal, or eventually we'll be all back in person, these conversations or these words or phrases are going to come up. So I just kind of made it work because we start off talking about race, where it is a actually socially constructed category that was made by us, by the people, like we the people, that is based on physical characteristics, ancestry, history affiliation, or shared culture. I am learning so much about the term race, and that it did not, even race or color did not exist until about the 15th and 16th century. And it had to do with points of power and separation. So just kind of pack that in. We're going to like build something here. So we're building on the idea of this word race. And then as we keep talking, we're talking about that leads to, if we're talking about race and separation or division, then it leads to racism, which is a belief or a doctrine that inherent differences among various human racial groups determine cultural and individual achievements, that one's own race is more superior than someone else's race, or that a group is inferior to another group's. So we've been hearing a lot in the news and social media, even probably, in the grocery store, about racism happening, whether it's systemic, or institutional, whether it's personal. And so that leads us to the big word that we're dealing with right now, racist. People use that in so many different ways, but this term I have down is a person or people who show or display discrimination or prejudice against people of other races, or who believe that a particular race of people is superior to another or inferior to another. And so you hear that, that's racist. Why did you say that? Or they're displaying racist behavior. So I want to talk a little about, just a few minutes, I have video to share with you, but I want to talk a little bit about your ideas of what you're just seeing right now on the screen about race, racism, and races, like your first reactions, anything that stood out to you, anything that intrigued you, or that maybe that you don't even agree with right now as the definitions that I shared. So anybody want to share? Anybody want to say anything about what they're experiencing, what you're feeling right now, what you're seeing, something that bubbled up, something that triggered?
Again, I know we're a small group,
Yeah.
so there's only so many of us to go around, but try not to speak over other people. The biggest thing that I actually will say I don't necessarily agree with, but I'll go on. The main thing in my learning process, especially in this last year, has been associating racism with having power. Okay. And so I don't see that in these definitions, that racism and racist has to be associated with having some sort of level of power, and that is related to that dynamic. And so there's always arguments that and I've even been guilty of this in the past, that I've said, well, that's racist, when it's really more so like prejudice. Everybody has prejudice, but not everybody has backing of power behind, if I make an assertion, there's more coming from a white perspective, and being backed with power. And so I don't see that in this definition, but otherwise I agree with everything on this page.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else have something that's bubbling up or they're thinking about?
Yeah, two things. One thing that was helpful for me over the past 6 months is just thinking about the concepts of racism as a spectrum, as opposed to like a black and white, yes or no. And just realizing that in different seasons as you grow, you might be moving on the spectrum, but that it's not as cut and dry as I used to be a racist and now I no longer am, or vice versa. But realizing that it's an ongoing process to address areas of, whether it's prejudice that's associated with race or other expressions of racism, addressing those appropriately and then moving forward.
Okay, so Charles, you had talked a little bit about a spectrum, that it's as a concepts of racism as a spectrum. And can you just expound a little bit more on like your view of what that spectrum might look like? You said it a little bit, but maybe just a little more in depth about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think as it could be external events, like, for example, police brutality against minorities, or it could be something on more of a micro level. I think we have things that are happening that cause personal reflection and evaluation, and we realize, wow, in this area, I'm now aware that I've operated out of a place of racism, whether I knew it or not. And we can start to address those, start to change behavior, start to change assumptions as we humble ourselves. But again, there might still be, because it's a growth process, that might be something that has to continue to go deeper in that one area, or there might start to connect dots with other areas in our life that we are knowingly or unknowingly biased and need to address those.
Okay, thank you. I know that within this, the term racist, I did not, like you say, put in the word, or I think Travis was talking about racism and racist being, having kind of that power aspect. And some of that does have to do with dominance or dominating one group over the other. And again, I think historically that has to do with power, excuse me, power from one group to the next, depending on economics, depending on geographics, depending on a whole lot of things. And then I hear the correlation between prejudice and racist. And that brings to mind when I was a kid, many moons ago, you didn't even talk about being racist. It was more about prejudice. And we are going to look at the term of being prejudice there, but how some of there's been kind of a spectrum or a chronological view of even some of our wording or some of our definitions, that they go from one to the other as we kind of grow, but we also learn differently, or as we're taught, maybe PC words to use for the time. So right now we're using racist. Sometimes people will use prejudice, but not as much. I don't hear it as much as I did when I was probably a youth myself. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second, and I'm gonna move to sharing a video with you. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. This one is a video. It's called Because I'm Latino, I Can't Have Money, but I'm calling it more about kids on race. And so these are 12-year-olds who are speaking about their own life experiences around race, racism, prejudice, all those different things. So to me, it was very powerful to hear and to see how youth deal with it. Even though this was done in 2015, you can imagine if we were to do it today, would it look any different, or would it even be even more expressive? So I wanted to share this with you. Let me make sure real quick. Hold on. Let me stop sharing and reshare, because I want to make sure I have the sound working, and we do, so that's a good thing. And then got to do all these technical things. Okay, all right, here we go.
I'm from Haiti and Nigeria. Like 3 things, like I'm Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Black. I'm biracial. I have an African-American father and an Irish-American mom.
My name's Lamine. I'm Muslim.
I'm Indian, British, Scottish, and American.
My parents are from Venezuela, and I was sharing like one of the foods that we eat, and then I got made fun of. They were like, "What is that? Ew. Oh, ew. What is that?" And like I cried because I felt like, oh, there's something wrong where I'm from. Like maybe like it's bad. Like I'm different.
I am an African-American adopted girl, only child, and I live with my 2 dads.
I remember when I was younger, I went with my family to a restaurant, and they made us pay in advance just in case we like didn't pay afterwards, and that was kind of upsetting.
You start to notice that people are different, and you have comments, they might be racist or they might not be, but by the time you get older, you know that it is racist and you should stop.
I feel a little scared about if I, just walk down the street, cops might just think I'm doing something bad, and then if I try to explain to them, they won't listen and then just start beating me up and doing terrible things to me.
I think there's like this anxiety that kind of comes with being biracial, like that kind of eats away at you, like almost like you have to prove yourself like that you're one or the other. Like, for example, like I hear the phrase, "You're not Black," all the time.
People sometimes think that I'm supposed to like talk ghetto or like whatever that is.
Oh, she's uneducated because she's African American. Because I'm Hispanic or Latino, I can't have like a lot of money.
Just this weekend, I went with my friend to Urban Outfitters, and we were shopping, and I really wanted to try on this dress, and then this lady that was just like there, she was kind of like watching me, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna steal it or anything.
I think white privilege is the idea that in your everyday life you're getting treated differently and sometimes with more respect, or people just trust you more, or they have certain expectations of you, like you might be smarter or you might be wealthier because you're white. It makes me feel guilty sometimes, even though it's not my fault. Like I feel guilty for having a privilege that like I don't deserve.
If I was ever like the mayor or something that controls the policeman, I would want to go out and look in the neighborhoods where there are people that's very friendly so you can pick them instead of like these guys that's just doing all this training. It's better to pick people that's more minded with the community than to just pick some new guy and get on the street. Like, it's just not gonna work out. We have like these kids from, they're Ecuadorian, and they get made fun of because they look Mexican. And they get told on a daily basis, "Oh, you like tacos? Oh, you like churros? How come I saw your mom on the corner selling ices?" Like it's, like I feel bad for them personally, because I'm like, wow, like they're not, and like even though they tell them I'm not Mexican, I'm Ecuadorian, they still get teased.
So, reactions. What did you see? What was kind of your experience? Have you experienced any of that or seen any of that in the mentoring education world, or your interaction with youth and children, your families yourself, or just anywhere? We can go so many directions with this, but I just want to get your reactions to what you experience right now. I love the little boys. I think he was doesn't matter what he was, but I think he was white kid who said, you kind of think you know if it's racist when you're younger, and then as you get an adult and you're like, oh yeah, that's racist, and you just need to stop. And I wish it were that easy, to just say, stop, but kids are very concrete like that. And that's great because we put up these other barriers and have all this other baggage that come along with it as we become adults. Is there any one story or child that stuck out to you or that you could identify with, that resonated, like that looks just, or that reminds me so much of, or this situation or circumstance?
Yeah, I resonated with the Hispanic little girl saying like how Hispanics can have money. I just like my family and I just grew up with like being told like, oh, like Hispanics are always seen as poor, and like no matter how hard we work, we're just always seen as like the lower economic status.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I can definitely relate to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, I think what stuck out most is just like, these are all like first person stories, this is, there's not any argument in terms of like, these are their experiences. And so it's very easy to politicize a lot of things, but like, this is what each of them telling personal examples of what they experience. Mm-hmm. And I would definitely say for our mentees, there's a huge struggle, across, all mentees about the idea of identity and like what identifies them, kind of like our discussion from last week. What do they associate with most? And then the question of how much is race specifically a factor in their perception regarding that. And so I was most intrigued by, especially the students that were like mixed and like were like kind of torn, like, do I have to be Black or white, or can I be both? What does that mean? And that's something, for our school, I see a lot of students that are Black and Hispanic, or, any number of things.
Yeah, it's really kind of sad that even though we might have all went through some part of that or continue to go through some part of the justification of who you are, that kids have to kind of navigate that. And they have to either talk about it or don't talk about it. And so when you're looking at children, or even if you're looking at that family, that's something that they may, it's not something that they're going to always share with you or that will come up. But now I think that sometimes those conversations can come up depending on how we approach them, what's going on in a book or the conversation that we're talking about, and just making that atmosphere or the environment safe for them to be able to share, whether it's, privately, like somebody tested me on who I was, or talked about my parents or my nationality or whatever, or even a situation that they may know, a personal situation. But I feel for kids and their parents and just the world as we try to navigate this, because as we see right now in 2020, I don't really like to use the term melting pot, but that was the term back in the 70s, by the 80s. But now it's like we're all intermingled, interracial, intersected with each other. And it's almost that we're going back to what before race, or that's the way that we should be going back, where it doesn't matter your skin color, it doesn't matter your geographic location, doesn't matter this. You're first a person, human, that's it, and keep moving. But we have a long way to get there before that actually happens. So having these conversations, or just being aware that whether it's your particular experience or someone that or someone that you don't know but have just met, but being open to that you don't know their life experience. And that's another way to kind of open up yourself to understanding, again, cultural humility and gaining that understanding. I'm going to share my screen again because we're going to keep moving with that and with this. Uh-oh, wait a minute. That's not what I wanted. Wrong thing. Let me go back. Wrong screen share. I want to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. All right, so now I'm going to move to, because I'm going to move it right along here, I think. There we go. I'm going to move to another set of terms, and this talks about prejudice, biases, or bias, and then implicit bias. So take a look at this for a second. This is where it piggybacks off of racist or racism, talking about a preconceived judgment or opinion against an individual, a race, or a group of people. And that really, you know, like I said, again, we talked more about, or as I was a kid back in the 70s and 80s, about being prejudiced. Now you hear, as you heard the young man talk about, that's racist. You didn't really hear about prejudice or the term prejudice coming from some of the young people. But, you know, we're aware of that particular term, but it's not as used. It seems to coincide or be used back and forth between us, but maybe not so much with the younger group. And then we have bias or biases that we have. And this is like in favor or against in an idea or a thing that is usually in that way can be closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. People sometimes develop those biases for a particular individual or a group or even a belief system. And that goes along with your implicit biases and sometimes called unconscious biases. These have to do with your assumptions, your stereotypes, unintended actions. Sometimes people say positive and or negative. I'm not too sure about that. That we make towards others based on the identity labels that we talked about, the social and cultural identifiers, race, religion, age, gender, sexual orientation, ability, socioeconomic status, all those different things. Sometimes because our implicit biases are stored subconsciously, these are things that we're kind of hardwired for. We may act on our biases without even realizing it. So with your biases, with your implicit biases, even sometimes with people saying that they may have a prejudice, they don't want to talk about them being prejudiced against one individual race or group of people or something or another, but it's there. And sometimes it is there because it's inherent. It's something that has been with them for a long time, maybe through their life experiences as a child, something that they've seen on television or experienced firsthand. And so as we're dealing with those biases, they have triggers. They have triggers. You might go a whole day without incorporating it, without being around someone who imposes a bias that they have on you. And then all of a sudden it happens. And I think the only way that can happen is if you stay in your house like we're supposed to be doing now and you don't interact with people. But and then even virtually, you probably run into biases, even though you're virtually looking at someone or talking to someone over the phone or through email, that it happens. So again, let's talk about this a little bit. I'm gonna just ask you, whoops, sorry, not yet. I'm gonna just open up the floor real quick. I do have another video to show that goes along with kind of unconscious or implicit biases, but just wanted to find out your ideas on that. Are there correlations to the racism, or are they like, you feel like it's separate altogether? Just reactions to the definitions that I'm sharing with you today. And if not, no problem. We can wait until after the video. And I know I'm giving you a lot to think about. I'm just giving it to you. We're talking and moving and talking and moving. Normally, this would probably be a longer session that we would have. We would sit down and really delve into this, and this. But since we have 2 sessions, I'm just kind of hitting and missing stuff just so that people really have a chance to think, oh my goodness, this is under the umbrella of, if I haven't thought about it, it is under the umbrella of cultural humility, cultural awareness, and kind of checking myself, what is going on in my world, How can I help myself and others as I navigate or as I'm helping students navigate? So saying that, if you want to keep sharing or something came up, I'm going to get the screen ready again. And this time, after I get out of this, hold on. There we go. Okay. This time I'm going to share a video called Our Hidden Biases. And again, I tried to pick things that were from the voices, from the experience of children, because that's who we're kind of working with, whether we're doing it virtually, trying to gain those relationships by pen pals right now. Some programs are doing it that way. There might be some in-person gatherings or drive-bys or drive-throughs or whatever that are happening, but we will be going back at some point to in-person. So just thinking about the different ways that you may see a child, you may see them. So you may just see them over email or through a letter. You know, what is and you can kind of tell some things even by what they're, talking about is they're talking about how their school day is going or how their work is going. You may see them physically see them virtually through a classroom setting or through some type of a Zoom chat like this. And sometimes it's body language. And so, or it's eye contact or the not eye contact. So watch this for a whole bunch of things that you see and look at it through the experience lens of this young man that you see right here.
Good morning. How are you?
Cool.
So, can we talk about how you got here?
You think I got a funny looking face? I just thought it was funny.
Hey kids, I'm telling you, go right here.
Man, we ain't doing nothing.
Go right here before I'm called cops.
This one's about to play.
So, you didn't do anything?
Nope.
Then what's all this?
Depends on who's reading it, I guess.
Well, looks broken. Skateboarding, huh?
Yes.
Is this the first time you've hurt yourself?
No, I get hurt all the time.
At home?
At home? He hurt himself skateboarding at the park.
Okay, ma'am. I'm gonna have a counselor come in and speak with you.
A counselor? For what? He's okay.
Well, I done told you them tricks were gonna put you in the hospital.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, too. A nurse will be in a few minutes to help you check out.
What's up?
That doctor thought I did this to him.
How you doing?
Hi.
It ain't fair. Fair has nothing to do with this. This is about you taking responsibility for your actions. Look, I know so many young men just like you that didn't do anything. And yet, most of them are in prison.
You don't know me. I ain't going to no prison.
If you don't want to end up in prison, you're going to have to get some new priorities and probably some new friends too. Look, you're not getting any younger. You need to get an education so you can get a good job.
Like you just like everybody else. You think you see, but you don't see. You see what you want to see.
I see what's in this folder. It shows me what you've been doing.
I ain't doing nothing.
I am not doing anything. Stop!
I ain't doing nothing.
I'm not doing anything. And yes, you were. Get to the timeout chair. Now, please. I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
Oops. So reactions. There's a lot there to see. Whole lot. We could be here for the next hour talking about what we saw. Because every time I see it, and these are some new videos for me that I sat down and really kind of looked through some of my old stuff and then found some new things. And this is a new one. So every time I look at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, and I caught this part or something that, just really resonated with me. So, but before I go on my own rant, just something that resonated with you, or like they said, did you see yourself in that video, or did you see yourself or someone, or a situation that you could resonate with in that video? Or what did you see? Especially through the lens of a mentor or an educator, how we interact with students. Even time, how you interacted through the in-person, because now it's different. So you don't really have a lens for that right now, but think about the lens that you did have with students, or that you do have right now, because Travis, you're, in the throes of things. And I'm sorry, Emily, I'm not quite sure where your affiliation with. Can you at least share that with us? I do know Charles, but I don't know you.
No worries. So I'm a CI's tutor, and I don't know what school I am working. I don't know if you know Michaela. Hold on, I don't know her last name. But last year I worked at Tennyson Middle School.
Okay.
But this was COVID. I don't know what location
right.
I'm at. So I just been doing hours to catch up.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So I do know that we're talking about mentoring children, and well, this is what the training is really about, and how that view looks. And most of the children that we are mentoring or working with and their families are families of color, whether, again, they're African-American, Hispanic, biracial, Asian, different religious backgrounds, you name it, we've probably got it. And so one thing that kind of, a couple of things bubbled up there in that video. I saw understanding the culture of the family, like when, or the family mindset, that the parents in that video, when they came, because the little boy had broke his arm, the doctor wanted to assume, just because the father came in a little heated, probably upset because he had to leave work, and come in, that, or assumed before that there could be some abuse going on. you know, just by, he said he falls all the time. Boom. Yes, I know we're sometimes triggered to, there's things that we are supposed to notice and just be mindful of or whatever, but that doesn't have to be just because it's an African-American family that it's domestic violence or any type of violent situation going on in the home. So just kind of getting an understanding of that. And that could be, of course, the doctor and the parent relationship, if that's the ER, you know, and they're not used to that person or haven't met with that family before, but kind of that cultural. But then I saw a lot of labeling and targeting, especially from the counselor, who in turn ended up being this child's teacher when they were younger, or maybe a resemblance of the teacher that they had that started this whole process for them and putting them in timeout by not recognizing, not seeing them. And the boy said, you think you see, but you don't see. You see what you want to see. And so that kind of stuck with me a little bit, was, you know, and when I think it triggered for her later on, as she saw that, or as she corrected him, it was kind of a mind trigger for her to, like, I've seen this kid before, or maybe she knew she had seen him, but she didn't realize of the impact that she had on that child from back in probably kindergarten. Whereas, you know, it's like the unfairness, I don't want to say, well, if you put it in the terms that we're talking about, then we're talking about assumptions. We're talking about the prejudice, or I wouldn't even say the racist, but in a sense, he could say, that's being racist towards me, when she said something about him being going to prison, you know, if he doesn't get his act together. So just really kind of seeing children for who they are, looking past that, maybe the behavior. You could see it in his eyes that he was like, why am I even here? Or here I am again from the beginning. He had already checked out because he had already had those marks against him from time when he was a little kid, no matter what his parents were saying to him. And maybe they were could have been reinforcing that same type of mentality. When you hear it over and over and over and over again, you know, you're looking for someone who, as we would be if you were, you know, told you're dumb every day or whatever, you're looking for somebody to hopefully give you hope at some point. Talk about, you know, you may not be good at math, but wow, you sure are this or whatever. Or this is where you can excel, or really talk about your strengths or the things that are important for you, to just give you a little bit of hope. And I know Ann Brodus was talking about that when I talked to her last week, talking about how do we see and help people understand that we're trying to build those relationships. We're not just the mentor, or we're the savior, or we're the deliverer or the nurturer. We're the nurturing people, but we also just have a heart to care. And so that's hard when you already have these preconceived notions that are coming up because of life experiences that have already been set in motion before you even landed in their view. So that, you know, so dealing with all those different things that they're dealing with, racism, the word racist, the biases, the assumptions, they may not be able to communicate it in that way, but it's all there. And then you're trying to work, not against that, but almost around it, or work through it with them at the same time. I know I talk a lot, so just, you know, tell me when to be quiet. Let me see, I'm going back to the PowerPoint. I know we're at 11:55, and I do want to give some time for stuff. I have a whole bunch of other stuff, and I'm trying to figure out which way to go. We'll do the next one, which is about the aggressions, microaggressions. This is another big term for us. Again, students may know about this term and may not know, but it's a big thing that's coming up, or it's a big thing that has been around, a big term that's been around. And the term was kind of coined or used the most from Dr. Daryl Wing Sue. And he has been, let me see if I can just move myself over a little bit. I'll do it this way. There we go. He talks about microaggressions. He's kind of coined the phrase, the terminology of it, as is a comment, a statement, or action that subtly or often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude or discrimination towards member of a marginalized group. Dr. Sue wrote a book called Microaggressions in Everyday Life, Making the Invisible Visible. And he explains it as the everyday slights or little slurs or put downs or insults that people of color, women, LGBTQ population, or those who are marginalized experience in their day-to-day interactions with people. He is at the Teachers College at Columbia University. I did have the opportunity of hearing him speak at a conference called the People of Color Conference through the National Independent Association of Independent Schools. So again, I think I put a plug in for them last time. If you haven't checked them out, go to NAIS.org. Check out the website. They have a whole conference that actually happens after Thanksgiving. So this year it always happens the week after Thanksgiving. This year it'll be virtual. There's all sorts of different topics and speakers. You can take a look at the past years that they've had conferences and see what the talk is about. They're in their, I think, 33rd or 34th year of having this conference. And they also have other resources, other workshops that they may be offering, sessions, resources, all sorts of things on the NAIS.org website. So check that out. I'm gonna move right along for a second to microaggressions, as I have learned, also has broken down into some other sub-terminologies, such as micro-assault, micro-insult, micro-invalidation. I don't know whether you know it or not, but this is how it all breaks down. So micro-assault is a verbal or nonverbal attack meant to hurt the intended victim through name calling or some type of other discriminatory actions. They give examples here. Students that wear maybe Confederate flag clothing or something that talks about, maybe white power, or even we'll get into whether we feel like micro-assault might be a category of the Black Lives Matter movement. Hold that thought for a second. Then we get into micro-insult, which is insensitive communication that demeans someone's racial identity or signaling out a person of color. Example there is a student corrects the grammar only of Hispanic students or the African-American students or the Asian students, or talks about, or student corrects the person because maybe of their accent. The teacher corrects someone's, what they're saying because of their accent or because of how they pronounce a word. Then we have micro-invalidation, which involves negating or ignoring the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experimental reality of a person of color. So that means, like, as an example, an Asian American student from the US is asked, where was she born? She conveys the message and is thought of really not as being American. So like, who are you? Where are you from? No, where are you from? No, where are you really from? So even though we talk about microaggressions, and some of you may agree or disagree with the subtitles or the sub-subjects of this, I thought it was very interesting to be able to share that, because that was something that I just recently learned. I just thought about microaggressions, and I've even, I have Dr. Sue's book and have, not read the whole thing. So I think I got to go back and look at it again for probably some of these subtitles, but let me stop sharing for a second. And so what do you think about microaggressions? First of all the different subs that they have. The thing that I think about the most is that they call them micro, but they're really not micro if they're aggressions, which means it's something negative. Again, it's almost like that oxymoron. I was having a conversation with another educator back in Maryland over Zoom the other day about that. And he said, I don't like that term because of the fact that it uses micro, which means small. And these things that are happening, the things that that are being said to people of color or women or people from a religious background or what have you, whatever group, is not small. They're the aggression. They are the insult. They are the assault. It is the invalidation of that person. So that, hit me. I was like, wow, yeah, when you really think about it, it should be called macroaggression. And there are some articles around that, between the idea of microaggression to macroaggression and what that means and how you use that terminology. But your thoughts, microaggressions, do they exist? Do you believe them? Or are they just kind of notions like, oh,
This is one of the better breakdowns I've seen of it. And I definitely agree with what you were saying. I kind of wish they had a different name. I think the term microaggression sounds very clinical and kind of pop psychology-ish. And so I think it's easy for people to be dismissive of it. And I think what's really challenging about it is, most people will quickly agree with, needing to end systemic racism or when acts or, violence particularly egregious, everybody's quick to agree around the need to address it. I think this is the microaggression piece is really hard to address because it is so subtle and so nuanced that I think for a lot of, I could easily understand why it would be hard for people of color to hold others accountable. And I think it's equally kind of comes with its own challenges and just kind of dealing with that interpersonal awkwardness to hold, yourself and others accountable. And so I think it's a concept that's really important to address. I just don't necessarily know what it looks like moving forward.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Have you experienced either from the onset view or seen someone else experience a microaggression or a microassault or invalidation or an insult?
I was just going to add that I think I know that person you just referenced was Dr. Sue.
Yeah.
Coined the term, but I feel like the term almost came from a distinctly white or like person power perspective of like, they don't even view it as a aggression. And so maybe that's where the perspective is coming from, even though, again, it does have a much larger impact. I would say this is a category that I think, you need to be almost most mindful of because it is a lot of work. I've had a lot of discussions with people, even in the last week or two, about the idea of the term woke, and that like that's not really a helpful term, that like you're never on the other side. It's like a constant work. And so being aware of how your words and actions like do affect others, that intention really doesn't matter in a way. Like the effects that the other person perceives and feels, is going to be what it is. And so even if you didn't intend harm, you can do harm. And so that's kind of what sticks out to me about that list, but I hadn't seen that breakdown. And so I appreciated that.
Yeah, like I said, it was I was like, what? And when somebody mentioned it, I said, I got to go back and look through that because I only knew about the aggression part, But let me share with you a couple. These were from an article or a chapter in the book or something. He's written about 19 books about multicultural education. So you can look up just microaggression and the whole list of things will come up from him, or you can, look up some of his other books. But within this, there was a list of microaggressions in the classroom that have been shared. So just thinking on maybe your experience, maybe you're thinking like, oh my gosh, we just did, I just, had that happen to me, whatever. So I'm just sharing a few of them. So disregarding religious traditions or their details, like about the impact of fasting for some people when it comes time, or even acknowledging not the majority holiday, or saying, oh yeah, well they celebrate Eid or something like that, but not even recognizing it really. Calling on, engaging, and validating one gender or one class or race of students while ignoring the other students in the class. Using inappropriate humor. We've all probably have had that happen in class that degrades students from different groups. And sometimes, like you said, those are some of those unintentional things. You're thinking it's okay if I say it, I heard it in my group of other colleagues or whatever. I can say it around, kids or around this group of kids or these groups of people, they'll understand. And so, not always. Using the term illegals to reference undocumented students. Denying the experiences of students by questioning their credibility and validity of their stories, such as like that young boy who was trying to, talk to the counselor, but then she just said, look, you're going to end up in jail, and didn't even talk to him about it or find out what's happening with him. Sometimes even microaggressions or assaults, assuming the gender of any student. So here we go, where we're talking about the pronouns that we're using or that some people are using of the he and the she, the him, the her, the they. Some people are comfortable using that. Some people aren't comfortable using that. Some people don't know what that is. And just kind of assuming because maybe they have long hair or have on a certain color that they're a certain gender or that they self-identify as that gender. Here's a quick question. So we have other microaggressions, assaults, and all of that that have to do with like racial background. So like, you don't sound Black, or you don't look Hispanic, or I didn't know, Chinese people don't eat rice. I thought you all ate rice, whatever. Those types of stereotypical things that happen or that may be said or have been said. So the term Karen or Becky that's out there now for some of the things that are happening in our life experiences that we're seeing on national TV, would you consider that a microaggression against white women or white people? I was curious. Or an insult or an invalidation or,
I'm not going to fully answer your question, Jocelyn, but I kind of talking about what Travis said. I do wonder, like, how much does power play into this? Mm-hmm. For it to be deemed a microaggression. I don't know where, like, I know more clearly with racism, I would say for sure power plays into it. I know, like, when I don't know about microaggressions, how much does power have to play into that for it to be deemed a microaggression and for it, so I guess that would be my question that I would pose.
Right. I guess mine was, I was thinking about it because I know people who are named Karen and Becky, and I'm like, or Rebecca, and like, how do you feel about that being kind of put into that pigeonhole that your birthday party or party pooper Becky or whatever they're calling, the different names that are going on, but I also see it, I myself do see it as an insult and or an invalidation or whatever, because it really should talk about that individual. Now, with microaggressions that we have heard and been experienced with on both sides, I'm not gonna lie to you, yes, sometimes I will laugh at them, even if they're about Black people. But then as I look at them later and I'm like going, that wasn't really all that funny, you know, when I really think about it. Like when somebody says something about, like, they call someone Tyrone, you know, that was like the Black guy's name and like whatever, but that was always considered kind of the, not the real, or like the cool or the gangster guy or whoever, you know, they would refer to it, or like saying something like, you're just being like Kanye or something like that, where I'm like, don't put, you know, all Black guys or whatever, or don't say, misuse someone else's name or calls like a Hispanic person Paco or Jose, and that's not their name, you know, but you're marginalizing them. So that to me is an insult. But in the moment, as some things are going on, you might just kind of, that's when it kind of goes like in one ear and out the other, or it doesn't really register with you until later. But those to me are the kind of conversations to have, whether you have them in your smaller group and then delve into a bigger conversation. But it is so important to have them because of the fact that it brings up how kids, of course, see that too, because they're getting led by example. They're mirroring what they see. So if they see on the news that it's okay to call somebody who calls a woman, white woman who calls the police because they don't like how somebody is doing something in the park or down the street or whatever, Karen or Becky, they're going to start doing that, you know, all over and think it's okay, you know, or not have a really idea about it. It's the same thing as that when it happens to as even kids talk about, kids use microaggressions and not even realizing it, because again, they're getting it from social media. They're hearing this, they're hearing that. Could be things they hear at home, could be things they hear at school, what have you. But this is like the bigger conversation to have. I know it's like, and it can be difficult because it does kind of, I don't want to say exposes you, but it helps you to check yourself. Because I know that if we were to really think about it, you could probably check off a bunch that you have either experienced yourself and or saw happen that maybe you didn't do anything about or didn't step in and say, not so much to say that's so racist or whatever, but even to say, you know what, that's really not right.
Jocelyn, can I respond to that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you know, I think it probably is a form of microaggression to label white women Karen or Becky. You know, I think those terms are often again associated with just some pretty over the top circumstances that everybody's like, what in the world, and would agree that was just, you know, nobody can really understand. I think kind of back to what Travis was saying, I think it's kind of a question of priorities, that it does need to be addressed, but because of kind of like what, again, back to, I guess what I was going to say was with what Travis was saying is the power levels involved, I think change the dynamic substantially. So when somebody from a lower position of power is making a microaggression towards somebody above, I don't, in my experience, from what I've experienced and what I've seen in others, it's not, it doesn't land the same way as when somebody in a position of power does it to somebody below them. And so I think you do have to get to the place where you talk about how this goes both ways. But it's a greater priority for helping people in power to address the people in power that are doing it.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I totally agree with all that. I think we keep coming back to that P word, that power and the imbalance of power. That was part of one of the definitions that I shared about cultural humility, about power imbalances. I am going to do two things because we have about 15 minutes left. One, I'm going to just open up the floor. If there are anybody that have any questions, comments, didn't like this, didn't like that, wish we had done more of this, whatever you want to say will be fine and helpful. And then if there is time, I may share a video that is from Dr. Sue that kind of explains a little bit more about his research and work around microaggressions. But then we'll be done. So opening up the floor, any comments, any resonating thoughts?
I'm gonna try to hop in and be as quick as I can.
Okay.
On the last topic, I think I would have a conjecture that just the whole Karen topic is, I mean, it's difficult, but it is like kind of a call to privilege, like recognizing what's happening. And it's easier to call somebody a Karen than it is to just say they're a racist, because it's that idea of how charged the term is. Like, you can get a lot of people behind the term Karen, but a lot fewer people behind the term racist. And so we're not to that, I don't think we're to that place yet where everyone can use the term racist and like have it hit the same way, kind of like what Charles was saying. Because it is racism, like when you talk about the woman in Central Park and her making her phone call, or when you have those false reports, that's, I mean, there's no question about it, that is racist. But the term Karen has allowed, I think, for like more engagement. Not saying that it's right, but it has, especially in the age of social media, like spread it quicker than I think if it was hashtag racist. I don't think it would be, you know, trending as much.
Okay.
So I'm not defending it exactly, but I think it's allowed for more engagement. And then I was going to say, jumping back to the video, personally, what, you know, as I'm a slow processor, what sticks out to me is I'm very much like an adamant rule follower. And so like what hits me hard is like knowing that I have to be careful and mindful of that process, because the counselor was coming off as a rule follower. Like, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. And it's so easy to miss the person in that process. And an area of guilt for me also, like you guys have followed my foster care journey. And the girls actually went to live with their grandparents last week. But analyzing my process with them and, you know, being quick to, you know, offer discipline or things like that makes me constantly reevaluate like my decisions, and like really trying to just understand the pain and like understanding a child versus like jumping to a conclusion, or like, you know, sticking with that, like trying to understand the moment more. And so that's what hit me most from that video.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah,
Jocelyn,
just-
I was gonna,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Charles. Sorry. You
Okay.
go right ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, comment on the video. I think the situation at the park where the white woman leaves is sadly very indicative of kind of the unspoken segregation that still exists. I think that I love how mentoring helps cross racial socioeconomic lines. I think sometimes it can veil the reality that, yes, for this 45-minute block, we're connecting, but in the real life organic moments that we all experience, the walls are still up. And so, yeah, I mean, just I think about that a lot, and just how to address that. I was going to say, just on the power piece and that conversation, I think, I don't know if any of you guys have read or are reading the book Cast by Isabella Wilkerson. but I'm tackling it, and it's been super helpful at just kind of giving some language to just the levels of power that exist in our culture. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of along the, some of the points that have been brought up. For me, with the Karen conversation, I feel like that there has always been a term for that. And that's kind of been something that's existed within the Black community. And so it's almost like this veiled internal language, or a way to be able to talk about that internally without kind of cluing others in. I think we've seen that differently over the last 30 years. I grew up with Becky. That was the word I knew. And now we've seen that with Karen as it's become more popularized. But, you can go all the way back to Miss Ann and language around that, where people automatically knew what that meant. And so it was a way to kind of talk about this entitlement or privilege, racism in a veiled way. And so I do think it ties back to that idea of power plus privilege, really is where racism kind of comes into play. And that's a part of that dynamic with those terms as well. And then the other thing I was going to say, one of the things that stuck out with me from the video is one, like, I don't think we can ignore that these aggressions are real. It's pretty obvious in both of the videos that you shared how real they are and how early we begin to experience those. I think of my daughter, and she was 3 years old the first time that she experienced an aggression from someone else. So I don't think we can ignore that. But the other thing, kind of thinking of this internally, is it's very difficult to acknowledge the narrative that has been created for people when we don't know that. And so I think we have to be really intentional about acknowledging that there are things underneath that have created a narrative in front of us that we just aren't aware of. And I think about, like, the counselor in that video, she's being objective, right? She has a file folder with information in front of her, but all of the biases that have really come into play with that folder and with that file, and with the narrative that has been created around the boy, she's unaware of, perhaps. And it's difficult to even recognize that at times. And so I think we can't be as objective and clear and black and white sort of thinking as we might want to be sometimes, or as the picture may present itself, because there's so much more hidden beneath the story that we just aren't even aware of. And so I think that's really important for us to think about, especially as I think about our work with mentees, with students, in our work and role as a mentor.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing all of that information. I hope that you got something. It sounds like that you have some sort of a takeaway, something for you to kind of think about that will help you, or hopefully help you as you continue to navigate your mentoring of students, or working with families, or whatever your role is right now or may become in the future. Like you said, it's a never-ending process. It's always something that I think it's just lifelong learning. It's lifelong openness and awareness, and to work with that change and to work around it as much as possible. Let me just see real quick. Where is it? Okay, there it is. I'm not gonna share the whole thing. Hold on, I gotta get out of this first. Okay, there we go. Okay, stop. Here we go. All right, let me see. Where's my other video. Let me just get out of that one. Get out of that one. No. And I don't want that one. I think this is it. Yes, okay. So this is, I'll just do about maybe 3 or 4 minutes of this. This is a interview that's happening with Dr. Daryl Sue, and how he just talks about microaggressions, kind of breaks it down, and the insults and kind of the impact. And I think we've talked about that a little bit, not knowing the whole story, but how it impacts and people of color or any marginalized or underrepresented group. Let me see, then we'll be done.
Professor Sue, thank you for joining us. So tell me just what exactly is microaggression?
Well, microaggressions are varying from being conscious, deliberate on a continuum to being outside one's level of awareness and unintentional. Microaggressions really are reflections of worldviews of inclusion, exclusion, superiority, inferiority, and they come out in ways that are outside the level of conscious awareness of an individual. When I'm asked, where were you born? And I say, I was born in Portland, Oregon. And they persist by saying, no, 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 where were you really born? And I'll say, Portland, Oregon? And they'll say, no, what country were you born in? And I'll say, the United States. They get very embarrassed. Now, this is an example that they are intending to make a personal connection. But the hidden communication, the true worldview, is that I am a perpetual alien or foreigner in my country. I am not a true American, because true Americans only look the following way. And that's what generates these behaviors that are microaggressions.
But you describe it as unintentional, and yet we've seen at the University of Missouri very blatant examples of racism.
You're right about that. Microaggressions vary from being conscious, deliberate, intentional, from old-fashioned racism and biased statements to the unintended consequences. And our studies do indicate that it's the hidden, unintentional forms of bias that are most damaging to people of color. And that, like at the University of Missouri, where you have people being called racial epithets or behaviors that are going on, it actually is only the tip of the iceberg. The reason why I believe students of color, faculty of color, are reacting in such a major way is that they are experiencing a climate that is hostile, that is full of microaggressions. These hate incidents on campus are triggering off this discontent, pain, and feeling of being silenced.
But there are critics of your studies and the notion even of microaggression, which they say have morphed from 1970 when it was unintentional to now everything that happens, and that people are just being overly sensitive. They say if you coddle these students on campus, how does that prepare them to live in the real world?
You know, the problem is that people believe microaggressions are very similar to the everyday incivility and rudeness that individuals, white Americans, experience in their day-to-day lives. They are quite different. Microaggressions for people of color are constant, continual, and cumulative. They occur to people of color from the moment of birth to when they die. And as a result, any one microaggression in isolation may represent the feather that breaks the camel's back. And people who don't see the lived experience of people of color and the daily onslaught that they experience tend not to believe that it's a major event.
You know, there's another...
Okay, I'm gonna stop it right there. I know we could have a whole nother conversation about what you just experienced, but I'm gonna leave you with that to kind of chew on. What was just spoken to you about, and especially that last term that he spoke on talking about microaggressions, and that in his understanding or talking about the phrase that it's something that is inherent of every day that has happened for people of color or other groups from the time of birth to the time of death, which like really stuck with me. I was like, wow, I had never thought about it in that context. Just real quick, before I turn off the recording, I'm gonna hit, was gonna talk about privilege, unpacking privilege and white privilege. If I ever get to do another one, we'll come back to that. I actually worked with Peggy McIntosh, so wonderful woman. But I wanted to share two things. One, this was another cultural humility model that kind of broke down humble. So I just wanted to share that with you as another way to look at cultural humility, being humble about the assumptions that you make, understanding your own background and culture. This is all reiterating what we've spoken about, motivating yourself to learn more about the other person's background, which we're doing today. You know, we're motivating ourselves to learn more, beginning to incorporate this knowledge into our work. And that's something that we've had conversations around, or that you're going to be self-reflecting on today and even further into the future. Again, lifelong learning, and then emphasizing respect and negotiate service plans, even though we're not like a service plan, but the plan of what you're doing as you're navigating through this challenge. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you. Let's keep the conversation going. This is the way that you can get in touch with me through my email address, would be the best way. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone that has questions, concerns, want to talk more about the different subtitles, or want to have me and or my grassroots team to come and talk to you more about cultural humility for your particular group. So thank you so much for participating, and I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn off the recorder.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for leading the session.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.